All right, with us to discuss this subject matter, we have regular guests, some of course joining us via Zoom. But here in the studios, we would like to welcome the former Director General of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, Professor Abdulsalam Nasidi. Professor Abdulsalami, we're glad to have you this morning.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Nigerians.
Okay. And also with us this time via Zoom from Lagos is the Director General and CEO of the Nigerian Institutes of Medical Research, Professor Babatunde Salako. Professor Salako, we're glad to have you this morning.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Also with us via Zoom from Atlanta is the Chair, Board of Biovaccines Nigeria Limited, Professor Oyewole Tumori. Good to have you join us on the program, sir.
Thank you very much for this invitation.
Okay, gentlemen, once again, we're delighted to have you. And just to underscore the fact, as indicated in our background by our correspondent, as well as in the banter between my co-presenter and myself, that everyone has received the news of the development and production of the malaria vaccine for infants, 5 months to 36 months, developed by Oxford University, and of course being produced in India. And all three guests that we have this morning, we've had you over the years, especially during the coronavirus and matters arising therefrom, and the various advocacy points that you raised on the need for us to ramp up vaccine, first development and production capabilities. But let's try to situate all of this that is happening now. Professor Nasidi, beginning with you. Is this malaria vaccine another wake-up call for us on what we should be doing?
Thank you, as usual, for this incisive question. Africa is finding itself again on the, sharp point of, be, as Shakespeare says, to be or not to be. We cannot keep on relying on others for what we need to survive. So it's now an existential issue. There are things that we can't joke with, things that we definitely have to find a way to make sure that we achieve self-reliance, self-sufficiency in getting those products to survive. So the malaria issue is a good example because malaria doesn't happen in Europe. Malaria doesn't happen in many other countries. It's now virtually eliminated in most part of the world. So the only part of the world so far that is endemic are some few Asian states and Africa. But 90% of the research activity is carried out by the developed countries where they don't have malaria. And at a stage, we all remember Margaret Thatcher. The British government had big grant for African countries to fight the tropical disease, malaria. One day she woke up and said, hey, listen, this is not a big problem. Let's divert our money to something else. Let these people go and see how they can help themselves. So it's a long time we start thinking of how to, win ourselves out of all this reliance on foreign support. But nevertheless, malaria has been the endemic disease and the #1 public health problem still, that if we can resolve, we shall save a lot of resources, means that we should endeavor to participate at any given phase of the development, into the research and development and manufacturing of such vaccines against malaria, yellow fever, Lassa fever. These are the diseases that are more endemic, attacking us more. So it's not only a wake-up call, I think it is the time that you use the biggest, the Big Ben's bell to wake us up that enough is enough. But the good news that I will use in ending this aspect of your question is that in this case, as you had rightly mentioned, the vaccine, even though research development-wise was developed by Oxford University, is going to be manufactured by Indian, Serum Institute. And then best news is that KEMRI, an African research institute, participated in developing that vaccine. So it's now an international effort, and it's a good example that we should all come together and start putting resources and, both human, financial, and all these things together. So our governments must start thinking, and that we shouldn't be penny wise pound foolish, because somebody was mentioning, we're not funding enough research and development, we're not this and so on and so forth. So I think the Minister of Science and Technology, Minister of Health, and others, should now start looking into how to, garner the resources together on, targeting our top priorities. And I believe our top priorities are those diseases that are, causing the biggest problem that affects our survival, our economy, and our, continuity.
All right, many thanks, Prof. A good way to start a conversation. You have actually made a very nice point that we should begin to think of how to wean ourselves of this dependence on foreign countries, especially for diseases that we suffer from and they don't have any business with. And that brings me to my question, and this is going to Professor Babatunde Salako. You are the DG of the National Institute of Medical Research. Could you please tell us exactly why is Nigeria still struggling with the development and production of vaccine?
Thank you very much. Vaccine development and production, a big deal really. But what is preventing Nigeria from being able to develop or produce vaccines within the country? It's simply because there is no significant attention paid into this. Nigerian researchers, both within and in diaspora, coming together, do have the requisite experience to be able to experimentally design and develop vaccines. There's no doubt about that. And the fact that Nigeria has been producing vaccines before also give credence to the fact that we will and we should be able to produce vaccines within the country. So the main thing that is lacking is funding. And unless the country chooses to fund specifically health research, we might not be able to get out of this. We will continue to be depending on donors. And of course, from our experience during the COVID vaccine distribution, you could see that we were not on the front burner at all. Those who developed the vaccine needed to first satisfy their own needs before they looked they looked at Africa at all. So the message here is that African countries, especially Nigeria, must find a way of funding research appropriately. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Salako, for your opening comments on this very important conversation. Let's go over now to Atlanta, where we are introduced Professor Tomori. Professor Tomori, again, let's have your opening comments on what is playing out. We know that there are some movements in the course of battling with COVID and thereafter. But how do we situate our current position in terms of research, development, and production of vaccines for a broad range of viruses, whether those that afflict us or that are prevalent elsewhere around the world?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me very well. I'm first of all, let me say one thing. Beyond research, I think what is happening is not, yeah, you can do the research, but what do you do with the research? And on the issue of local vaccine production in Nigeria, I have a very sad story to tell. 18 years since we decided that we're going to revive local vaccine production, 5 presidents, 6 ministers, we have turned local vaccine production into another Ajaokuta project. Not because we don't have the people, but because self-interest has overridden national interest. And that's why we are where we are today. We have all the resources, as Babatunde has said. We have all the listeners, but just bringing that together letting people who are involved, both at the executive, legislative, civil service, getting them involved and having subsuming their national interest over, their personal interest over national interest is what we need to get us to where we are. The VOM is producing vaccines, so it's nothing new to us. But why can't we go to the human side? And it boils down to this simple fact that we are not working together with consensus. We're not coordinating our activities together. There have been too many interests in this local vaccine production. Unfortunately, those interests, some of them have been self-interest rather than national interest. And that's where we are today. So let's be frank with each other and stop pretending about all these things we're talking about.
Professor Tomori, thank you very much. I mean, we know that you're always brutally frank when matters of this nature get raised. National discourse, and sometimes, I mean, we've seen you either on Good Morning Nigeria or elsewhere, you've teared up just because you feel pretty concerned about why we appear not to be why we're not making progress. But you put your finger to it, we are not coordinating. And you said the label is probably quite fitting, that this is another Ajaokuta project. Just what is happening? What are these personal interests? These personal interests would appear to be ephemeral in the first instance anyway, because the national interest ordinarily should predominate. Why do you think these personal interests keep trumping the national interest?
Because we don't have enough patriots in this country who are involved. I mean, during your program before this time, you mentioned something about people in the field, farmers are doing well, but then the sellers are making some. We have the same problem everywhere, both in the vaccine production. There are some people who are probably more interested in Nigeria continue to import rather than Nigeria continue producing its own vaccine. We can produce our vaccines, but I think the problem is, I keep saying it, is that until we ourselves get to the point where we say, look, this is my nation, this is my country, these are my children that I'm working on, we will never get to that. But unfortunately, it takes just 1, 2, or 3 people out of 100 who have self-interest to torpedo everything. This 100-meter dash to produce local vaccine in Nigeria is being turned into a marathon with obstacles everywhere. And until we saw that, I started by saying 18 years we've been on it, 5 presidents, 6 ministers. It's not that we're stupid in Nigeria. It's just that there are people who are just making sure that we don't succeed.
Well, many thanks, Professor. Professor Nasidi, you heard Prof. I like the terms that he has used, turning a 100 meters race into a marathon, likening the vaccine production, of this country to that of the Ajaokuta Steel project. That's, and then, of course, saying it frankly that some people just don't want these vaccines to be produced here because of what they benefit from importation. Now, you should understand exactly what this chain is all about. Could you now, please, point fingers, really? Where should we be placing the blame at the moment, as regards the situation when it comes to vaccine production in the country?
Well, I think to answer that question, let me give a perspective as to, the small history of vaccine manufacturing in Nigeria and where were we coming from, and then where we are now, and then where we intend to head to. First and foremost, Nigeria had been a leader in vaccine manufacturing in the early days. And, at Yaba Vaccine Laboratory, which I headed for about, 9 years, we manufactured vaccines that were pre-qualified by the WHO. Vaccine manufacturing started in that facility, at the Yaba facility, as far back as 1952. But research and development of vaccines by both the foreigners and Nigerians, including Professor Tomori himself, Professor Fabi of STAS, Fagbami, Professor Tekena Hari, there are, Nigerians that committed their lives into development of vaccines and biologicals. And at that laboratory, we were producing vaccines in the face of outbreaks. So while we were producing yellow fever vaccine, I assumed duty there in 1986. By that 1986, mid to 1987, we had the biggest ever recorded yellow fever epidemic outbreak. in Benue that killed almost 10,000 people, affected 50,000 people. And then we had one of the largest, what they call urban yellow fever in Ogbomosho in Western Nigeria. In the face of that outbreak, we had to manufacture, vaccines. So by the time, the federal government and the WHO and others were to gather resources to import vaccines, it took 3-4 weeks before the imported vaccines started coming in. Meanwhile, luckily, we had this local manufacturing facility, even though it was not producing big volume enough. We had vaccines ready that we deployed within 48 hours to the field, and it saved lives. And then let me just again follow that up, that vaccine that people have doubted, oh, it's local, it's manufactured, it might not be potent. Luckily, the US CDC from Fort Collins, Colorado, came and joined us. And we field tested that vaccine against imported vaccines from Pasteur, from Dakar, from Paris, and others. And believe me to God, we have a letter written by the director of that center, CDC, saying that the Nigerian vaccine profiled 98% protection level, more than the imported ones. So we were encouraged, we wanted to expand, everything started. That's why your question came in. Self-interest came in. Political decision somersault. People just, we got funds. I must praise Babangida regime. They gave us 180-something million. We put up big building. I'm sure they will soon show the picture. Established and expanded the manufacturing capacity. So, but unfortunately, there's a mistake also that was made. The old building where we were manufacturing, since we're expanding, we suspended manufacturing in 1991. We succeeded in completing the new building by 1992. And then everything just changed. The political, somersault decision posted most of our staff out, and we didn't know where, that was coming out from. Why should the government act the way they did? And so they scattered. Just like Professor Tomori has mentioned, the exact process that led to the, grounding of Ajaokuta was what led to the grounding of vaccine manufacturing in Nigeria. Okay, so now all said and done, that is where we were. We could produce the vaccine. We were producing yellow fever vaccine, rabies vaccine, and we were beginning to experiment with the measles tissue culture vaccine. Then something just came up, and that is the fact that it's as if don't worry, you can't meet your requirements and all this. We shall, imported vaccines are cheaper. You now have Nigerians, even in the government, fighting for the foreign vaccines. That, why should we waste so much money if it is cheaper to bring? But they don't know that this terminology called independence, it is not just a question of for you to have the political independence. Also, you must be independent in the economy, in actually being able to manufacture and produce what you need to survive. So as a result, they torpedoed our efforts to continue vaccine manufacturing. I have some pictures I will have shown where you will see that at the stage of the second phase of our expanding the Yaba laboratory, we had imported enough vaccines. We got grants from for International Development Research Council of Canada, IDRC. I wrote a proposal. I got $1.5 million. We got support from the Babangida government. We did a South-South collaboration with Brazil, Fiocruz, and the Institute Pasteur Dakar. And within 1.5 years, we had the capacity and we had all the things that are required to manufacture vaccine.
Well, I don't know whether we should end the conversation now, gentlemen. I mean, Professor Nasidi, Professor Tomori, and Professor Salako. What else is there to say? Because the analogy to Ajaokuta is very apt.
Yes.
I want to buttress the points raised by Professor Nasidi. In 1987, I recall I was about traveling outside of the country, and this yellow fever thing was pretty common. But it was a simple walk-in into City Hall, where you had the Lagos City, Lagos Island Council, for me to get my jab for both cholera and yellow fever. The vaccines were available, and they said, this vaccine is produced in Nigeria, 10-year coverage, and they had it stamped on. It was simple, straightforward. But Professor Tomori, of course, you can hear us clearly, I believe. On Good Morning Nigeria, we've had conversations around Ajaokuta a number of times. And some of our guests have also mentioned live on air to say that there was a time, for instance, when some foreign partners or whoever came, and when they visited Ajaokuta, they were shocked that the project had reached an advanced stage. Yeah. And then the next thing was to start discouraging, to say, oh no, this is not, it's not going to work. And that is the story where we are. But we have our country, and we have to fight for the interest of our country. So, Professor Salako, I want to come back to you. We cannot continue on the path of lamentation, but what is required to be done in terms of focusing, in the first instance, on funding for research and development, and at the same time also ensuring that we can produce? Because as Professor Tomori drew attention to the fact that if VOM is producing vaccines for veterinary purposes, why can't we have vaccines produced for the human race? Prof.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm a bit in the know of some of the recent government efforts at producing vaccines, especially when COVID came. And Professor Tomori and I were in a small meeting or group where we had to put so many things together to ensure that we are able to move forward. But as he said, it looks like the coordination was not good enough. And I believe that beyond the current arrangement, this may have to be particularly taken care of by the presidency itself. It is only at that point that we will be able to break through some of these barriers that Professor Tomori has noted. Beyond that, it will remain a mirage for us to be able to move forward. I can imagine what Prof has been going through, in spite of having mentioned this severally. So there is this political will that must come on board. And unless that comes, we will not be able to move forward. Now, on the other side of vaccine development, Professor Mori was also planning what akin to the so-called Silicon Valley in the US, as he prepares to get the BioVaccine Nigeria Limited to start vaccine research and production in and around Lagos, using the old vaccine site that Professor Nasidi was talking about. And this, again, needs to be appropriately funded. Over the past years, health research has suffered from inadequate funding. And that is why some of our health indices has remained very poor when we compare them to many other African nations. Recently, we have been trying to create a new council, a health research council, or a medical research council that has one function of funding health research in Nigeria. Of course, our institution used to be a medical research council when it started. And at some point, it funded some research until, I don't know exact point in time when it stopped funding. Even then, the funding was not enough. The recent Lancet Nigerian Commission that reviewed the health situation in Nigeria actually recommended that Nigeria should create a medical research council. Now, this council needs to be funded so that health researchers can approach the council, just like we have with the NIH or the Medical Research Council in the UK or that of the South Africa, where particular health challenges in Nigeria can be funded, especially in the area of vaccines that we are talking about and other diseases that are ravaging our country. This is how we can create improvement in our health system, train the next crop of future researchers for the country, and of course, improve the health indices, as it were. Unless, again, we are able to do this, donor funding is unlikely to address all our problems, even though it might address some, especially those that have to do with global health risk. The ones that are peculiar to us will have to be sorted out by Nigeria. And the only way to do that will be to give appropriate funding. So we hope that this council, when it is eventually created, currently it has passed through the Senate and it's awaiting the concurrence at the House of Representatives. If that is attended to, then we'll be struggling with getting Mr. President to sign this. And once this is signed, and what is put into it in terms of funding is respected and implemented, then we will begin to get out of the woods. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Professor Salako. Professor Tumori, so far, the three of you, three professors who are vast in this field, have blamed the government. You have put all the blame on the doorstep of the government for where we are as regards vaccine production in the country. But my question is, as experts in this field, why do you think that private investment in this sector has not been thought of or has not thrived, just in case there's been an attempt? And then why is it that for the orthodox practitioners, I mean, those on the street who try to, during the COVID period, we did see a lot of orthodox practitioners come up to say, okay, we could do this, we could. Why are they also not getting some kind of support? I mean, Professor Tumori, I'm sure that if we can get private investment in this sector, maybe something positive may come out. So why do you think that has not been explored?
You're very correct. I mean, you said it. In fact, the whole issue about vaccine itself is not a totally federal government business. First of all, like you said, I was just not blaming government alone. I'm blaming virtually everybody who is involved in the private sector, in the civil service, in the legislation, and all those people. We're all involved, and we're responsible for where we are. But back to the question, vaccine is not a totally federal government thing. Mayor Baker has 51% shares in Mayor Baker. So there's the private investment into that. But sorry to use the word, when government puts its dirty finger into private sector, then we have a problem. And that's what we're having right now. Let's be frank with each other. My colleagues probably, I'm 77 years old now, so nothing, if you kill me now, I'm okay. But what I'm saying is that we need to tell the truth behind what is happening in our country. The truth is not that we don't have capable people. It's not that we don't have the people, but there are one or two people somewhere who are in positions of authority, who are making sure that all these things that have been done will not work. And that's the place. I related to Ajaokuta. Go and read what happened about Ajaokuta. In a smaller level, this is what is happening in local vaccine production. In the same country where VOM has been producing vaccines since 1924, we cannot, produce vaccines. We've been producing. You mentioned you got your vaccine locally produced. I was here when all these things were. Part of my training as a veterinarian when I was to look at that same Yaba lab. I've been to the Yaba lab now. Equipment ordered in 1990-something are still lying outside in that place there. So those are the factors that we're talking about. In Nigeria, we talk about capacity building. We don't talk about capacity retention. Outsiders are interested in because they come in and build your capacity. But you have to retain your capacity by creating an enabling environment. That enabling environment to function is what we're talking about. And when government brings certain regulations or something of that nature, what they will not allow for foreign industries, what they will allow for foreign industries, they won't allow for their own company, in which they have shares. These are issues that we need to begin to talk about. And as I said, yes, we need the private sector. But the private sector still has to function under government rules and regulations. And that's where some of the problems, issues are arising. Leave it to the private sector alone. They will get this thing done within a short time. But immediately you bring government bureaucracy into many of these things. I got gray hairs, just battling about vaccine production since 2005, 18 years of my life. All my hair was black then. Today, because I'm fighting on a daily basis on what we should not be fighting for, you make a success in one direction, they bring an obstacle the next day. And that's why I said the 100-meter dash becomes a marathon of obstacles until we settle those personal issues. And when people begin to become patriotic, when people see that what we're doing is for the good of our country, is for the good of our children, is for our national pride, until we get to that level, we're never, ever, ever going to be able to produce vaccine in this country.
So, Professor Tomori, I'm chuckling because of the phrases you are churning out this morning. It's a marathon of obstacles. I know that there's also the steeplechase in athletics, where you run into a water trough. You also have to have a hurdle to scale, or hurdles to scale, and all that. I know that, Prof, you will still be around. It will be well with you. Your silver hair is an indication of wisdom, and we'll have you, and the country will have you for a long while. And that's because, I mean, your patriotic disposition is valuable. We're not discussing this for personal gain. It is how well we can uplift our country. I'm just wondering, Professor Nasidi, I know that sometimes it might be difficult to point to some of the personal issues that arise, but what is it when we say, for instance, that we don't have the political will, or the political will doesn't exist? I know Professor Salako was saying that unless the thing gets to the presidency, must everything be at the desk of the president? The president is a busy person. Every time we talk about political will, you find that the channel is always to the president. So what do we find at the ministerial and bureaucratic levels that tend to frustrate this? How do we achieve a break-in through these other layers of obstruction, rather than just saying, look, goes direct to the president? Because the president can issue his own directive, but his hands are full. And so what do we need to do? What do they get wrong at the bureaucratic, even ministerial level, that create all of these obstacles?
Well, it's not just at those levels. The obstacles, as Professor Tomori mentioned, is at all levels. And unfortunately, you know, the courage, the will, you know, to face those obstacles, those challenges, is what is lacking. Let me tell you something. You see, the issue of everything ended up on the desk of the president and all this is not the real problem. It's not the real issue. The real issue is, okay, we cannot say that the Nigerian government has not agreed to address the issue of local vaccine manufacturing leading to self-sufficiency. They have. At least they have signed an agreement with a private company, May and Baker, and considered to take 49% and then give private sector 51%. So you can't blame the government that they have not taken that initiative. Number two, you cannot blame the government that they are not funding to some extent. Even the R&D and also, as Professor Salako had mentioned, you can say the funding of R&D is not sufficient. But at least that initiative is there. So there is a hurdle, but it's not the main hurdle. You cannot say that we do not have what is required to actually make it happen. What do you require to make it happen? You need the right staff, the right facilities, the right processes, which is the technology, and actually the right funding. So we have everything now on ground to make that to happen and hit the road running. But as you rightly said, where is the hidden agenda? What is now causing this? And I believe is the major failure aspect of the government. Oh, you have money, you have project, you have given, but no follow-up, no prioritization. For instance, this COVID outbreak has exposed us, all of us in Africa, not just Nigeria, that we have been joking with our lives. For many years, we have diseases that have been pestering our life. We should rise and look for solutions. As I said, the R&D mostly from abroad. What should it be? We have very strong staff, young Nigerians, experts that can really initiate this. As Professor Tomori is saying that he's 77 now, me, I'm almost 70 and above. So, I pray that God, will keep our life for us to see that final one single dose that will come out from a factory in Nigeria is about to happen. So both May and Baker, federal government, and others and other key privatists should stop pointing fingers at each other and should now come together and really see how to make it happen. That's number one. Number two is, to have the facilities, to have the trained staff. We have trained staff. They're still around. Luckily, none of them is dead. Before I came here, I checked. Those who sent to Brazil, those who sent to, Dakar. It reached a stage whereby at that same Yaba laboratory is where we did not just do research on vaccines, we even developed our own diagnostic kits to diagnose first cases of AIDS in Nigeria. So we are providing surveillance laboratory support to the Ministry of Health on malaria, on measles, on yellow fever, on Lassa fever, not just vaccine production. So some elements of R&D was already going. But nobody took it serious. At the ministerial level, at this is as if, those vaccine people. Until when outbreaks happened. When yellow fever came, if we didn't have the yellow fever vaccine, it would have been a problem. Just to round this section, COVID came, and we were caught hands down again. I can't use the other terminology. Mm-hmm. Africa had nothing to show. Or we were waiting for bilateral, multilateral system, COVAX, Orishirishi, that will bring us the vaccine. Vaccines were developed, vaccines are available, and there are no vaccines in Africa.
They had vaccine nationalism.
They had vaccine nationalism. At the end of the day, they even pitied us. Or say, okay, let's give them some of the vaccines. Even though some of the ones they gave us were already near expiry date, some 3 months they landed. We got the vaccine. We had no means to take the vaccine to the people. We were not capable of vaccine delivery, efficient vaccine delivery, and so on and so forth. So the problems are multitude, but we come back to the topic of today, that, we should indigenalize research and development and then fight like a bulldog to put in place enough of the talk. Like you said, about private sector. The largest vaccine manufacturer today in the world is not in America or England or France or Germany or Russia. It's in India, a developing country. And it's a private sector vaccine manufacturing by an individual. He initiated it. And he started actually from manufacturing not even vaccines, but biological anti-snake venom, which I will come back to. And from that, the Serum Institute of India today is the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world. It's a private sector manufacturer. But what does the Indian government do? To put their social responsibility and make sure that that company and other vaccine manufacturers in India do not fail. They subsidize them heavily. They look for the experts. There's an expert. When I was a member of the CVI in the WHO in Geneva, a young Indian came and started that, he can produce hepatitis B vaccine, private. Today, he's one of the biggest manufacturers of hepatitis B vaccine in India. And he didn't start with venture capitalist funding. He started with Indian government support and funding. And then it's a private sector supported by the government, and things are moving. There's hypocrisy. There is lack of patriotism, just like Professor Tomori mentioned. We do not have that patriotism driving it. People are just looking at it from their point of view. How can they, benefit, and so on and so forth. So this is the tragedy.
All right. Many thanks, Professor Nasidi. Listening to all our guests speak this morning, I am particularly pained because I agree that, yes, we have some diseases that, affect adults, but mostly it's the children that suffer more. Because, there are so many childhood illnesses in this country that we need vaccines for. And, getting these vaccines to the rural areas, even when they're imported, the potency of these vaccines, considering the fact that, where they are being produced and our conditions here are completely different. We do not have the facilities to preserve these vaccines until they get, to the hinterlands and all of that. These are issues. And then it affects, mostly children in this country. And you see that a lot of children are suffering, or a lot of children are dying as a result of this particular situation. And I'm quite sad that, the political class are not concerned, about this particular health issue. This is health, and it's very important. And that brings me to my question, Professor Salako. Now we are at this point. We cannot produce vaccines, and then Oxford has gone ahead to produce or rather to develop, and then there will be a production in India. Malaria vaccines are coming soon. Please, could you tell me, how potent would this vaccine be? I have issues about it because, you know, I already mentioned that we get to see, especially when you go to villages, the kind of vaccines that get there is completely different from the vaccines you get from, you know, the urban area. You go to a facility, say in Abuja here, and then you go to one rural village in Edo State. In fact, the color of the vaccines, by the time they get there, knowing that, yes, there are certain conditions, you know, that this vaccine should be kept and all of that. Will this malaria vaccine actually solve our problem? Or it's just a way for some people to make some extra money into their pockets in the name that vaccines have been imported?
The malaria vaccine is said to be about 75% potent. But then the main issues about vaccines has to do with cold chain maintenance. So if we do not have the appropriate measure to conserve the temperature required for the vaccines to remain potent, then moving from the city to the hinterland and the villages may have, vaccines may have problems. Their potency may reduce because of that. That is one area that we need to look at. And that potency may need to be rechecked at the level of the village distribution to be sure that the cold chain that we are currently using is working or not working. That is an implementation science kind of a thing that we need to do. Beyond that, I'd like to say that within the Nigerian academia, there are skills to develop vaccines, even though we really haven't recorded one before. But what happened during the COVID era did energize a lot of scientists. And we have since then been trying to produce or develop vaccines within the country. And I'd like to say that the Tertiary Education Trust Fund actually funded about 4 institutions, including our own institution, the University of Sokoto, University of Jos, Devon, which has been producing vaccine for many years, even though this is animal vaccines. We believe that their experience can be very useful in bringing back our human vaccines development and production in Nigeria. And then, of course, we have this National Chemical Research Institute in Kaduna, which is into nanotechnology, that is trying to produce an adjuvant for the vaccines that are currently being developed. So, and of course, beyond these 4 consortium, we have other universities in Nigeria that have tried to produce vaccines in country. I believe that this is an effort that is deserves to be supported by government so that we are, in a way, preparing for the future. In case we have another pandemic, the Nigerian scientists may be able to develop our own local vaccines. But if this effort is not supported, then we will remain where we are. So TED Fund, as it is supporting this. The fund is not that much, but we want to thank the TED Fund Executive Secretary, who has believed in the process, the one before and the current one that is supporting this. Currently, the University of Sokoto has been able to complete its molecule, and that has been sent to the NARIC. They are working on it for one transmission to the University of Jos for animal testing. Now, this may not be the breakthrough we are waiting for, but certainly we are learning the ropes. And once we are able to perfect this art, either as a group or as an individual, then we'll be able to tackle any future occurrences. Now, this is why I talked about funding, because nobody will bring money for us to be able to do this. Now, the situation we are in terms of vaccines production within the country, if we are at the point that we are now, we can't move forward, we can't go back. I believe there has to be a solution somehow. And for a problem of this magnitude, where it's something that will improve our primary care and improve our health indices, I think it's something for the presidency to use an executive power to move things forward. Because those things that Professor Tomori are talking about are actually below that level. And once we can get the attention at this level, maybe we can move forward. So this is why I made that, that suggestion. Thank you.
All right, Professor Salako, once again, thanks a lot for the insights that you have elaborated on with respect to some of the funding that is getting into medical research. Very useful that TED Fund is doing what it's doing, but certainly TED Fund would need to do more. We know that apart from dealing with infrastructure in tertiary institutions, TED Fund also gets to sponsor the publication of academic journals, also the sponsorship of doctoral candidates, attendance at conferences, and all that. But specific to medical research, this is one area we believe that TED Fund should up the ante in terms of its outlay for funding. And the many more institutions that are involved, the better. I know that there's an innovation council that's been set up. So innovation will not just relate to iron and steel or other hard issues. So medical research ordinarily, or research in general, of which medical research will be a subset, should be one that also be focused on. The president is the chair of that innovation council. It incorporates a number of MDAs, and the reason why the president is the chair is to enable him have oversight and then give appropriate directives. And the point you just raised a while ago, Professor Salako, of getting the president to help drive this is a useful one. But back to Professor Tomori. Professor Tomori, of course, we know that research, big-time research for medical purposes cannot be a single individual effort. So who should be involved in this, and who should be encouraged to get involved in medical research? Is it virologists? Is it microbiologists? Is it biochemists? And then to avoid the silo mentality, to say, no, I'm working on this one, don't come to me. How do we ensure that there is collaboration? And while that collaboration is ongoing, there's also the protection of intellectual property.
Thank you very much. Just permit me to make one or two comments before I answer those questions. First of all, the issue of political will. I think we have more than enough political will in Nigeria. We get that overdose of political will every election time. Will is speech. I will do this, I will do that. That's what political will is. It's a commitment that is lacking. We don't commit to the will we make. Or sometimes we commit the will into our pockets, and that's where we have the problem. So his will is not, everybody has will. No problem about that one. But then complete your will by, putting resources into the will. Also to assure my other colleague about the potency of vaccines, I think the NPHCJ is doing as much as it can do. I think we need to improve on that. Most times the vaccines, even when they get to the lower level, are quite as potent. But then the problem we are having, once we abandon and emasculated our local government areas, then that's where the problem is. In those days, we used to have local government. That all the vaccines we used to be in the local government store, and they took care of it. Now, state government have emasculated the local government. Federal government itself, I don't know what they're doing with local government. And so that chair of the government has been abandoned, and that's why we're having some of the problems we're having. Secondly, Africa, we depend too much on equity. You cannot beg for equity. You have to fight for equity. A good example is India. When we started, like India and everybody, we were all begging everybody. Today, India doesn't beg anybody. You remember during the time when Britain told us we were in the red zone, this red, amber, green. And then they said, Ramaphosa, every African government, Britain, this is racist, this is whatever. What did India do? India says, if you don't accept my COVID, I won't accept your COVID. That day, Britain capitulated. That's how you fight for equity, not begging and pleading and whining and all those kind of things. Africa has enough of resources, untapped resources, to make it, to be able to fight for equity. Back to your question, sir. Babatunde has said it. It's collaboration. There's no one person. In fact, the research into vaccine now is in so many areas. And so that all of us have to work together. We've been working in silos. I think TEDFund has been trying to do that to make sure that we have people working together. And that's why they had this consortium, VOM, NIMA, the team in Kaduna, and one other group in Sokoto. That's the way to go, because we cannot be experts in everything. I see a few of my university colleagues, many universities announcing we made discovery. We're deceiving ourselves. Let's be frank with ourselves. There's nobody who does anything individually now. And then our reports are made in the newspapers. That's not where you show your production or whatever it is. Not in the pages of newspaper, in the research journals, among the people, industries who are involved in this thing. So we need to work together as scientists, in our own different areas, in putting all of these resources. Again, I raised the issue. It is not even that. It is more than just, building capacity. It is retaining capacity. I think recently you heard about one of the people in the House who was trying to ban people, say you cannot, no certificate for you until you have worked for 5 years. How can you stop people when you have not created an environment when the person will work? Why are people leaving Nigeria? Because the environment was not conducive for them. The brain drained to where it can be nurtured. You have not improved the environment. You are making draconian law to say you must stay. Stay to do what? When you have not prepared the environment for them to work. These are issues we need to tackle. I used to say one thing. You come to the government of Nigeria and you say, let's do 1, 2, 3, 4 things. Then they jump to 4, where the money is, and forget 1, 2, 3. A good example is, say buy equipment, train people and all that. They go and buy equipment. And then forget the training and forget the house where you're going to put the equipment. And then the equipment is lying in the sun for 5 years. Those are the things we need to do. When people give you recommendation, step 1, step 2, step 3, follow it according to those steps. Not wake up and pick the one that gives you money and forget the rest. And that's when Nigeria is where we are littered with Ajaokutas all over the place. I'm laughing, but I'm not happy. I'm laughing, but I'm not happy.
Professor Tomori is shooting straight from the hip and also having fun this morning. Always a delight having you, gentlemen. Very serious issues, and we recognize that these are the challenges. I mean, procurement is a bane. It's a bane of our system, and how to deal with that bane has been the recourse to a wide variety of measures adopted by governments to be sure that things are done properly and the cost of contracts don't get too exorbitant. We hear sometimes road contracts in Nigeria are the most expensive around the world, and so on and so forth. But it's a useful to Professor Nasidi, you mentioned something. We're going on a short break now. Just to buttress it, because we tried, I think it was under Obasanjo as president, that there was a recognition that the state should provide some support to private companies to enable them to thrive and become big players. And you saw part of that support go to Dangote, for instance, which is why we gained self-sufficiency in cement production. You also, I think there were a few companies that were chosen for that purpose, and India was a reference point. Tata, for instance. Tata trucks that we find all over the place were supposed to be competing with Mercedes-Benz and other hard things that they are producing. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with our 3 distinguished professors this morning.
Honestly, words cannot express how we feel. Before the bridge, the road from here, Nasarawa to Loko, is about 74 kilometers. This is the link between Nasarawa and Loko. The bridge, which is about 3-5 kilometers across the river Benue, has been on for about 10 years now. Before now, if you live here for Loko, 74 kilometers, and somebody leaves Nasarawa for Kaduna, he will get to Kaduna before you get to Loko. The implication of the completion of this bridge is the cutting of the travel distance by about 3 hours. Our people from Nasarawa can now travel from here to Onitsha and come back on the same day. The economic and social consequences of this milestone development can hardly be compared to the ease with which people move has opened the area, and many people are coming around now to invest in agriculture. Where to score this government on this achievement, we will score them extremely high because it has changed the dynamics of the social and economic activities of our people.
My name is Giftiro Bremat. I am in Basic 2. I am I'm from Oba Community Primary School 2. The people from Ubek, representative from the Abia State Government, headmistress and teachers from Oba Community Primary School 2, my fellow pupils, ladies and gentlemen, good day. We welcome you to this unique occasion. We thank our President Muhammadu Buhari for the school feeding program. Some of us do not eat while coming to school, but this school feeding has helped us a lot. May God bless our presidents and governors in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, Mr.
And here's Brants. Now Guerrero. The queuing up in the middle. Marlon! Max for Jibril. So, yes! And it's loose. Mukoko will get there and will score! This is Warder. Warder scores! A captain's job.
Sportybet sponsors coverage of the German Bundesliga.
All right, you're welcome back at still Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. I want to come back to Professor Nasidi right here in the studios. Professor Nasidi, earlier in the week when we were discussing the production of the malaria vaccine, we did draw attention to the fact that private sector investment or private sector contribution to the funding of research. We have many wealthy Nigerians. Some of them, of course, I hear they compute their wealth now in the local currency as well as in hard currency, whatever denomination that is. But how do we also get to incentivize them to recognize that this is one area to fund? People are building skyscrapers that are collapsing all over the place and where you have very low occupancy rate. In the meantime, the basic things that we need that will advance the name, keep the names almost immemorial when you fund that research. Is it that the researchers are not marketing themselves sufficiently, or that those who have the money don't know where and how to spend the money? That way you can bring them in. I'm raising this for a particular reason. You were at NCDC and you were in charge during Ebola in 2014, and that was when we had you a number of times on Good Morning Nigeria. You'll recall that it was a private company that developed something that looked like a vaccine that was supposed to have been used to help Dr. Adadevoh, Stella Adadevoh, overcome her condition. Unfortunately, I think the American government under Obama didn't quite allow for the export of that particular product, and Adadevoh passed on. May her soul continue to rest in peace. So that was a private sector thing that was going on. So how do we, as I said, get the private sector, let's say private individuals, through their foundations or whatever, to fund researchers, or how to get researchers to market their ideas and then get those with deep pockets to also be interested in this field?
Well, thank you once again, Sterling, that the key is everybody's role, everybody's responsibility. It's a teamwork. It should be a coordinated teamwork and so on and so forth. But the premier, the lead in that team should be the government. How do you incentivize, local initiatives, local talents, and so on and so forth? I keep using India, Brazil. I've been to all these countries, and some of the people that thrived there and really became world famous citizens are my colleagues. Some either we did PhD with them or we work with them on the bench developing products and so on and so forth. One of the guys that I work, my PhD decision was hepatitis, liver disease. And before I finished, I developed a vaccine against hepatitis. And the technology I used was now used by one of my colleagues who migrated from the country where I studied to US and then to Brazil and also they're using that technology. They use that technology to produce millions. How did it happen? Just like the same India. Some of my colleagues who worked with in Boston, went back to India. The government of these countries, they source for their own, individuals, their own indigenes who have that capacity, and they fund them, they encourage them, they even incentivize them by giving them, facilities. They subsidize them on power, they subsidize them on water, they subsidize them on this, just for them to establish and compete. And the government gives them a target. We want, can you manufacture 200 million doses of hepatitis vaccine in 5 years if we support you, and so on and so forth. Nigerian government initiated it, particularly this government, at least through this health support project, the central bank and others. They identify those projects that are viable, that can sell, and then you really support them, and then they go into manufacturing. Another way is seeing that, okay, now if you have real pure economic, from economic point of view, you can't go into business except you are going to make profit. So if you go into vaccine business and the chance that you may lose in the first 5-6 years, then the government should give you some incentives, like the federal government is doing now with bio vaccines. So okay, we can't give you cash to start manufacturing, but we shall empower you to buy vaccines for us. You make profit and actually develop and produce the vaccines that we require. I think these are things that must come together. I'll give you live examples. For instance, I'm involved in developing not only vaccines but some products with some of my colleagues in Nigeria. We developed, anti-snake venom, jointly with some of our British partners and some Nigerian partners here. We developed hepatitis B vaccine, we've developed Lassa vaccine, and so on and so forth. But virtually all of them, except the anti-snake venom, which the president personally, when he was at PTF, supported to actually get off the ground, all are still hanging in the air. Whereas my colleagues that we work with, some that even took the technology I used during my PhD, have used it to produce these vaccines in other countries. I'm mentioning in Brazil, in Mexico, and other places. They are producing, and they are on the world. What do they call it? Market. They are quoted in the world. What do they call it? So the incentive, coming from the government, primarily as the lead of the group of that team, should be to identify, the right people, the right research team, the right research topic and priorities, and then support that research something. I think if we do that, we shall move, really, really far. As Professor Tomori and Professor Lako are mentioning, a lot is happening as regards the, COVID vaccine. As Professor Lako has mentioned, Nigerian universities have come together and said, oh, listen, we can't just rely. Let's try. Let's get something. Something is there. TED Fund has funded. It shouldn't die there. To move from that level where they are now to real manufacturing, that's where the problem is. You real government incentives to really make it happen. So they make it a priority. It's not now just for profit. Government say, no, Nigeria has 250 million people. We must be vaccine manufacturers. Then the last point I want to bring is now the issue of the regional priorities. If you want to be self-sufficient in a particular product, you manufacture it and you can't sell it to make profit. All this, it's not viable. It will collapse. But Nigeria, with a large population of 250 million or about that, and that will grow by 2050 to be the 4th largest population in the world, a country with a large population in the world, should start thinking, how do we cope and match that? By that 2050, we will be able to manufacture up to 60, 70, 80% of what we need to survive. And they should start now. And that is where that issue of getting the organization that will bring this together, the president's office, president's table. This is the plan. By 2050, we want to produce 80% of all our vaccines. How do we go about it? Minister of Health is involved, bio-vaccine is involved. This, and somebody in the office of the president should be querying every year. You are supposed to be producing 30% now. So accountability is not just I give you $10 million, you account $10 million, you have bought this. No. Accountability, I gave you $10 million to produce 50 million doses of hepatitis vaccine. Where is 50 million doses of hepatitis vaccine? If such a system is existing, we shall not be failing. Yeah, we fail in Ajakuta because nobody queried in the process. Yeah, when should we roll out the first steel? And when should we reach 100 million tons of steel per annum? Oh, we are now in the 3rd year. We are just rolling out 10 million. Why, instead of 100 million? Why is it happening? By next year, we want you to roll out 200 million. People should be held responsible. Accountability should not be just on money for money. Accountability should be on what the money is supposed to be made of. Yeah. Right. Then lastly, the regional point of view. The COVID exposed us that, Africa is so hollow. So we didn't really have anything on ground. So at the 35th session of the African Union that took place in February 2022, African leaders came together, particularly some presidents, led by Tshisekedi of Congo, Ramaphosa of South Africa, Kagame of Rwanda, Kenyatta of Kenya, and so on and so forth. They said, look, let's get it, let's start doing something. Something started happening. South Africa went exactly the way we wanted. Private sector, government, and they started manufacturing COVID. But they didn't regulate the market. So the COVID vaccine was manufactured, African manufacturing. There's no market, and nobody was buying. Instead, Africa was relying on the donor vaccine, and some of the countries that wanted to buy, they said, oh no, you cannot buy the South African vaccine because we have better vaccine and we are going according to our standards. So many things working. Unlike India, they will say, no, we are going to use the vaccines manufactured in India. So said the Prime Minister of India. Nigeria can say, okay, we are going to buy only vaccines made by South Africa because we want that regional viability. We want regional collaboration and cooperation. Then the last point, Professor Tomori has been talking about that, is that all countries cannot manufacture the same type of vaccines. For instance, if South Africa is now manufacturing COVID, we should now say, okay, we can thrive on yellow fever and hepatitis. Maybe Rwanda already is going to start manufacturing measles, etc. So if you do that type of sharing the responsibility, sharing knowledge, and sharing what do they call it, technical capabilities, we'll be able to catch up faster.
And then there'll be a market for it. Many thanks, Professor Nasidi. I would like to get to Professor Tomori now. You've heard Professor Nasidi, a long list of what we should do. In your own view, what would you like to add? How can we, improve in this sector and, get it right?
Thank you very much. To note one thing, that research support is not election cycle. Research support is a consistent, prolonged thing before you can reach the return on your investment. Some of the things we are not talking about today, the internet, I'm talking to you from here in Atlanta, and that started with over 25 years of research funding by the U.S. Army to lead to that one. Our government must realize that research is not an election cycle thing. It is a continuous thing for national development. And therefore, only then can we reap the returns of investment. What we're getting right now in Nigeria is our return on our iniquity. It's still the same ROI, but it's return on iniquity, not on return on investment. That's number one. Secondly, Africa must get away from dependency. We must get away from, every time blaming the other people. Colonial era, I'm 70-something years old, and I'm blaming my father who died 50 years ago for my poverty. Does that make sense? I mean, it looks so stupid. And sometimes we'll be listening that we do in Africa. Finally, just to say that this government has not done anything. I mean, you saw the advert with the transport and all those things. We are saying do the same for other sectors. Because if you build good roads and your people are sick, they can't travel on the roads you have built. So, get the health of your people in place so that they can use the roads you have built, use the airports you have built. These are some of the things. Let me quickly stop there because I know a lot of things. But finally, we as scientists and all that, we must be bold enough and courageous enough to tell the government where it is going wrong. And when we too ourselves are going wrong, I mean, because we also, the blame is not only on government. We also have some of the reasons, even amongst us here, some of us are, when you put us on the same way, we are more corrupt than the politicians in our different universities. So let's be frank with each other. Over.
All right, Professor Tomori, thank you very much for your contribution. Professor Babatunde Salako, I would like you to speak to this very briefly. I know, of course, you're still DG and therefore a public servant. The conversation we're having this morning tends to point more to the executive branch of government. Now, we know that appropriation obviously is a function of the legislature. Do you get a sense that the legislature is sensitive to the very valuable insights that you gentlemen and indeed others would have provided on what is required to advance research, development, and production of vaccines in Nigeria? Do you get a sense that they have that appreciation? And assuming that is not there, how can we then begin to get them interested so that their attention can also go there? Because part of the oversight that Professor Nasidi was talking about can also arise from the legislative branch, where they would say, yeah, okay, we voted 10 billion, or say, let's say 10 million for this. You were supposed to have produced X number of vaccines over a 2-year period. On their oversight duties, they'll say, how come we haven't done this? They're looking at outcomes and what challenges there were, so that assuming the money wasn't enough for the next appropriation cycle, whether real or supplementary, then they could do that. So, basic question is the legislature sufficiently sensitive to the issues that we are discussing?
I will say yes and no. Yes, because what we get from the budget office is an envelope. And so the budget office has already determined the amount of money it's going to give to our agency, for example. And for us to be able to get anything beyond that, then we need to talk to the legislature. And when you now meet the legislature, you will need to do a lot of lobbying. And my experience is that because research money is not providing contracts, so to speak, it becomes very difficult to get people to fund research directly, because research fund goes to researchers. And like Professor Tomori said, return on investment on research does not come the next day. So it becomes a challenge for us to get them to use the constituency projects that they do have, which is focused on development of their own constituency, rather than putting this on research. This has been the challenge that we've had as government agency trying to get funding. But recently, we did create a NIMA Research Foundation, which is headed by the current Minister of Health, His Excellency Babatunde Fashola, who introduced what he called research evangelism to the legislators and, of course, to the executive arm. And so we went to see the legislators, we went to see the Minister, Budget and Planning, and that yielded fruits, because research was funded in this year's appropriation up to 1 billion naira. We have never had it so good, although we haven't received the funding. But the fact that that has been promised, and we also got support from the legislator that this will be left in the appropriation, it tells me to say that, oh, they are sensitive to our request, even though we cannot, or we couldn't get from their own constituency project, which we had targeted before. So that's why I said yes and no. But then I wanted to look at the issue of the private sector. I believe that researchers needed to provide better value proposition to business people who we want them to put money into research. All
right. Many thanks to Professor Babatunde Salako. Thank you so much. Because of time, I think we'll have to leave the conversation at that point. Of course, the point has been made, and we've actually hit the nail on the head on the program this morning, and we hope that there'll be some form of improvement, and then we can actually get it right. Many thanks, DG and CEO of the Nigerian Institute of Medical Research, Professor Babatunde Salako, for joining us on the program this morning. We also like to appreciate Professor Oyewole Tomori, who joined us from Atlanta, the chair, Board of Biovaccines Nigeria Limited. Many thanks, Professor, and also Professor Abdusalami Nasidi, former Director General, NCDC. Glad to have you on the program.
Thank you very much.
All right, so let's have a bit of sports news now.